Welcome to lesson 8 part 2 for this session. So remember, in part 1 of this very training, we took a look at how to create resources, and a quick recap of part of what we did in how to create resources. We simply went or navigated to the resource tab, and then of course on the resource tab we now created our resources either by clicking on add in the command bar or simply by right clicking within the resource space and then clicking on the add button. Then also don't forget, you can also click on the insert button or insert button in your keyboard, so then you type in the relevant resource. So that's exactly what we did, and part of the things we did in the very first part of this lesson, which talked about how to create resources. Alright, so what we're going to be doing right now is to now begin to assign the resources. So to assign the resources, so remember in lesson 1 I made mention about the fact that when it comes to resources, there are 3 major resource categories, and those 3 major resource categories we have are, remember we talked about labor resource, and then we also talked about the non-labor resource, and then the final one, which is the material resource. So those were the 3 resource categories that we actually discussed in lesson 1. So now we're going to begin to assign the resources to the activities, and then in the course of assigning the resources to the activities, we're also going to do that vis-a-vis what we now refer to as the budgeted total cost. Budgeted total cost. So what I mean by that is Primavera determines the cost of an activity using the resources that have been assigned to that particular activity. Say for example, within your project, let's say we have 3 activities which we call activities A, B, and C. And those 3 activities are assigned to specific resource persons. So let's say those resource persons are John, then also Jerry, and then James. And let's say John, for example, earns 10 per day, and then Jerry earns, let's say, 5 per day, and then let's say James here earns, say, 20 per day, because depending on the currency. So maybe this could be $10, or let's say 10 naira or 10 rands, depending on the currency. So if activity A, let's now talk about the duration of these activities. So let's talk about the fact that if activity A, say for example, has a 5 days duration, and then activity B has 10 days duration, and then activity C has 5 days duration. Now let's assume that we now assign John to activity A. So let's say John is now the resource person whom we assign to activity A. Remember we said that John earns $10 per day. And then if John is going to do activity A, and activity A will last for 5 days, and we pay him $10 per day, that means in all, activity A is going to be costing $50 in total. So in other words, the $50 will be the budgeted, the BTC, that's the budgeted total cost for activity A. And let's assume that activity B is assigned this time around to James, and James earns $20 per day. So of course, if James does activity B for 10 days, that will be $20 times the 10 days, which of course will now be equivalent to $200. So Primavera will tell us that the budgeted total cost for activity B is $200. So that's exactly how Primavera estimates the cost of activities within the project. And that's exactly what you're going to be seeing as we begin to assign those activities. So where we're going to be paying particular attention will be the budgeted units for each of those activities, because budgeted unit basically now tells us how many of those resource persons are going to be working on that particular activity, and then also how long they are going to be working on the activity. All of that is part of the things we are going to be illustrating using Primavera P6. So to be able to assign resources, first of all, we need to display our resource column. So display our columns, if you still remember, all we simply need to do is we can simply go to the toolbar, we click on columns, then the columns window pops up, then click on available options, and then click on find. Then you type in resources. and then you hit enter. Don't forget, we're looking for just resources, not resource anything. So you keep typing, you keep clicking find next until you get your resources. That's if your resources is not already displayed in your table. So if it's already displayed in your table, you may choose to skip this part. Alright, so this is our resources. I can close this now, and then I click on add to list. So I've added it to list. I usually like to have my resources right after the finish column. Okay, so once I've done that, I also click on available options, then find next. I'm also going to be adding budgeted total cost. Alright, so I click on find next, so you can see the budgeted total cost here, and then I also add it to list, and then make sure that I have it, just after my resources, which is exactly where I want it to be. So once that is the case, I click on apply, and then I click on OK. So another thing I also want to do at this part is to also display my resource tab within the detail view. So I right click in the detail view, and then I click customize activity details, then I select resources. But usually, because the tabs in the detail view are not so much like we have in the table, I usually like adding all the tabs in the detail view. So to do that, you simply click on the second button, which is add all to list. So when you click on that, it adds all the tabs to the list. Then I click on OK. So you notice that all the tabs get displayed here. So I click on the resources in the detail view, so I can see the resources as I assign them in my detail view, and then also I can also see the resources here from my table once I assign them. So all of these are now what we are going to begin to do right now. Okay, good. So assign resources, we now begin from one activity to the other. There are various means we can choose to assign the resources. We can simply within the resource column, under the cell for resources, double click, and then you're going to see the assign resources window pops up. So from here we can begin to assign resources. Now let me close this window. I can also use the add resource button in my resource tab within the detail view to do same. So when I click on add resources, the assign resources window also pops up, and then I can also do the same thing from my command bar simply by clicking on resources there. So whichever one you prefer, all you simply need to do at this point is to display your assign resources window. So once you've been able to display your assign resources window, don't forget I can expand this window just simply by clicking and dragging. I can compress it depending on exactly how I want to view it. And then another thing I usually like to do is I usually like to bring it down to this side of the screen so that it doesn't obstruct the view of the table or the Gantt, and then also gives me a better view of the allocations that I am doing. Alright, good. So once that is the case, it's now time for us to begin to assign resources. So if you notice, within the very first one, which is the milestone, I am not able to assign resources to the milestone task, simply because it's a milestone, and like I mentioned earlier on, milestones have 0 durations. They do not represent activities, they are basically major indicators. Okay, good. So I now select the next activity, which is activity A1010, that's the design building layout. And then let's say the design building layout is going to be done by the architect. So I go to my resources, and then my assign resource window, and then I take a look at the architect for my project. Again, I want to expand this a little bit more so I can see the roles as displayed, so I would know which is the architect, and then of course also other resource persons. So you can see Emmanuel King is the architect, so I select Emmanuel King, and then I click on the assign button. So once I click on the assign button, notice that it assigns Emmanuel King to this very activity, which is the design building layout. Then another interesting thing you may have noticed also is the fact that the budgeted total cost gets populated almost immediately, showing us how much that particular activity will cost. Now let's do a little bit of interpretation within the detail view so you can understand exactly how the budgeted total cost came about. So if you take a look at this, you notice that we said that the Emmanuel King, when we were creating Emmanuel King, we said Emmanuel King earns 500 naira per day, which is exactly what we have here. That's the price per unit. And then this activity is going to be done for 10 days. So if he's going to do this work for 10 days, so if you take a look at what we currently have here, so you notice that once we assign Emmanuel King, our budgeted total cost showed that this particular activity is for 40,000 naira. Now, if you take a look at the detailed view, it gives us the proper analysis. So there are key things, key columns you need to display in your detailed view. The columns you need to display in your detailed view, just in case you don't have them now, you need your budgeted units per time. You also need your, I'll show you how to display them, so don't be worried. You also need your price per unit, then budgeted units together with your budgeted cost. So these are some of the columns that you need to display. So to display this column, simply right click on anywhere within the detailed view, that's this empty space. Then click on customize resources, customize, and then simply go to available options, click on find, and then take a look at my columns and find each of those elements that you have missing in yours. Alright, so all you just need to do is you just type it in here. For example, budgeted units /time. So just type it in here, then click on find this. It's going to show up the moment you do. So all you simply need to down do is to click on this add to list, and then it will be added to your list. So like I mentioned earlier on, these are the columns that I want you to display. So see if you can display them. You can pause this video and then display these columns one after the other. Okay, good. So once you've been able to display the columns, you can click on. Okay, so let me just do a bit of illustration. So just in case some of us have forgotten how to display the columns. Let me remove this my budgeted unit per time. Okay, so you can see I've taken it away from the list. Then I click on OK. So you notice budgeted unit per time is not here any longer. So remember, if I click on customize resources column, and then I go to available options, and then I click on find, then I type in budgeted units /time. So you make sure you leave space there, and I click enter. So you can see, ensure that after the budgeted unit there is a space, then before you put your slash, then leave another space and then type in time. So you notice that the budgeted unit /time shows up here. So I click on the add to list, so you can see it shows up on the add to list. Then I bring it down to just before the budgeted units, just before the price per unit. And then of course I can close on this find button. So this is how to display your resource columns, and then click on apply, and then okay. So you notice that my budgeted units per time shows up here. So if you take a look at the analysis, what we have here is that budgeted unit is 8. So my budgeted unit is showing 8. It simply means I'm going to be using 8 of these architects per day. And then if each of them ends 500 per day, 500 times 8 is 4,000. So let's just do a little bit of mathematics here, so you'll be able to appreciate what I'm talking about at the moment. So remember, what you're having here is showing us that the budgeted unit is 8. So in other words, we have 8 of the architects, and then we pay them 500 per day. So that means 8 of them would earn 500 naira each on a daily basis. So 500 times 8 would give us 4,000. Therefore means that they would earn 4,000 per day. And then remember that the duration of this activity is 10 days. Okay, you can see the duration from the table. So you can see the original duration for this activity is 10 days. So it therefore means that if these people earn 4,000, each of them earn 4,000 per day in the next 10 days. So that will be 4,000 times 10. Okay, so that will give us 40,000. So that's exactly how Primavera arrived at the 40,000 budgeted cost, or total budgeted cost that it's determined for this very activity. That's the design building layout. However, we're using only one unit of the architects, not 8. So we're not going to be using 8 architects to design our building layout. So what we now need to do is, let me minimize this now. We simply go to our budgeted units per day. That's budgeted units per time. That's why I told you to display this column, because it's absolutely necessary. And then change it to 1. So you just click within the cell and then enter 1 per day. So the moment we change it to 1, if you notice, the budgeted cost changes to 5,000. You can see the budgeted cost here is now 5,000. It simply means that if Emmanuel King is the sole architect that we have, and then Emmanuel King works on this design building layout activity, earning 500 naira per day for 10 days, at the end of the day, that will amount to 5,000 naira. That's exactly what we have been able to show here. The next one is the design building layout. So again, we're going to be assigning this design to Emmanuel King as well. So we assign this to Emmanuel King. And remember, we just need 1 unit of this. So again, you notice that the cost is 5,000 because it's also 10 days duration activity. So all our designs will be assigned to Emmanuel King. So we also assign the MFE design to Emmanuel King for the purpose of this illustration. And then again, budgeted unit is 1. And then of course, plumbing design also to Emmanuel King. And then budgeted unit, we also change it as 1. So you notice that we have assigned all the designs to Emmanuel King. So let's say the project manager has to approve this design before the designs can now be implemented. So we select the design approval, and then we select John Doe. So again, remember John Doe is the project manager. Let me expand this so you can see what I'm talking about. I want the role column to display so you see what we're talking about. Good. So notice this is the role column. The project manager has John Doe, so we assign John Doe to this. So you simply click on John Doe and click on the assign button, and then under the budgeted units, we're going to be using 1 unit for John Doe. And then if John Doe does this for 7 days and earns 1,000 naira per day, that will amount to 7,000 naira. Okay, so we go to the next one, which is a plan procurement. So plan procurement and everything about the procurement will be handled by the contract manager. So if that's the case, we can simply select all the activities under procurement and then click on contract manager and assign. So you can see the moment I did that, everything gets assigned to Jerry Smith, Jerry Smith, Jerry Smith, Jerry Smith. So we just to now change the budgeted unit as usual. So we have it as 1, then also 1, then also we have this as 1, and then also 1 budgeted unit, then also 1, and then we also have 1. Okay, good. So we've been able to now assign all the activities under procurement to the contract manager, and that is Jerry Smith. Okay. Now, for the foundation part, we're now going to be assigning the foundation to the relevant resource person. And here, we might also be using other things like our non-labor resource together with the material resource. So let's start with the clearing, for example. So for the clearing, the project manager is going to be in charge of this because this is part of his supervisory functions. And don't forget, 1 unit, we have just 1 project manager. And then for clearing too, we might be needing an excavator to do the clearing, if I'm not mistaken. Then we assign it as well. Then under the budgeted unit for the excavator, we're also going to be needing 1 budgeted unit for the excavator as well. Okay, so we have been able to assign the excavator, as well as John Doe to this very activity. And then of course notice that the budgeted total cost shows up. For the setting out, let's say this is now going to be assigned to the project engineer, which is JK Daniels. So we assign it to JK Daniels, and then also 1 unit of JK Daniels. For the excavating would be done by let's say JK Daniels will be in charge, and then also supervised by John Doe, each of these 1 unit. And then let's say we're going to be needing 2 excavators. So I select excavator, and then I assign, and then I enter 2 units of excavators, 2 per day. And then notice that the total number of units is now 20 because we're using 2 per day. That's why you're having 20 budgeted units. And then it assigns the cost as well. So you notice all the resources displayed. Then for blinding, we may be needing a concrete mixer. Let's say we're going to be needing about 3 units of this concrete mixer. So I simply go to budgeted units, and then I type in 3 there. And then I'm going to also be needing the engineer. So I select JK Daniels, and then I also assign 1 unit of the engineer. Okay, good. So I've also assigned for blinding. Then for the block work, we're going to be needing the concrete mixer. Say for example 2 units. So I assign it, and then I change the budgeted units to 2. And then in addition to concrete mixer, we're going to be needing sand as well. So I select sand, and then I click on assign. And then let's say we're going to be needing about just a ton of sand per day. So I simply enter under the budgeted unit 1 ton per day for this concrete work as it were. And then for our filling, we're going to also be needing sand. So I assign sand, and then let's say we're going to be needing about 3 tons for the filling. And then for the slab, we're going to be needing sand, let's say 1 ton of sand. So I select 1 ton here, and then we're going to be needing cement, depending on the units of measure. I think my cement was measured in bags, because typically that's how cement is measured in Nigeria, this part of the world. So depending on the size of the project though. So let's say we're going to be needing about 100 bags of cement. So I type in 100 there. So we're going to be needing, let's say, 100 bags per day. And then I type in 100 there. So please be mindful of the fact that since this is a 10-day activity, you need to be able to reasonably estimate how many bags you're going to be needing per day. So if you're saying you're going to be needing 100 bags per day, just like I've done, it simply means that for the total 10 days, it's going to be 1,000 bags. That's really on the high side. So let's just say we're going to be doing about, let's say about 5 bags per day. So I put 5 bags per day there. So that will now amount to 50 bags in all for the 10 days duration. That sounds a bit okay. So for the granite, we're also going to be needing granite. So I assign granite, and for granite, let's say we're going to be needing about half a ton per day. So I simply do under granite, I select granite, then I type in 0.5, then I hit enter. So when I do that, you notice that for granite it shows me that I'm going to be needing about 5 units in all. So if I'm going to be using half a ton per day, so that means for the 10 days it's going to be 5 tons in all. So that's exactly what you're seeing, 5 units per day. Then I'm also going to be needing a concrete mixer. So I select concrete mixer, and then I assign it, and I'm going to be needing 2 units of this concrete mixer. So I change this to 2 per day throughout the duration. And then in the process too, I'm going to also be needing the project manager. So I select John Doe, who is the project manager. Again, don't forget I have just one project manager. and then the project engineer as well. Assign the project engineer, and then don't also forget there's 1 unit of this project engineer, which is what we have assigned. So you notice that we've assigned everything now about the slab, and then the moment we do, it gives us the budgeted total cost for our slab, and that's exactly what we have displayed here. So this is exactly how to assign and load your resources within your Primavera P6. Because don't forget that there are also other activities here, but then I leave that to you to figure out, so you can decide to assign resources to each of these activities one after the other. So if you finish assigning the resources, you can now close the assign resources window, and then Primavera will automatically calculate how much in total the project would cost, which is what you're seeing at the very top. Then also let you know how much each phase of your project will cost, which is what you're seeing here. And then also how much each work package will cost. So you'll be summing up the work packages, which is what you're seeing there. And then these are the activities cost based on the allocations or the assignments that we have done so far. Now, aside from that, there are also other ways you can assign costs. Say for example, there are what we refer to as expenses. Expenses are other additional costs which we incur, which to a large extent are not part of the cost attributable to our resources. Those are the things we refer to as expenses. So of course, things that can make up your expenses can include things like travels, for example, or let's say you're doing training, or say for example accommodation. Let's say you have a resource person whom you put in a hotel room for some days. All of these form part of what we refer to as your expenses. So expenses can also be assigned to specific activities, just like we can also assign resources to them. Let's assume that our engineer, for example, anytime he comes, we need to pay for his travel. Or better still, the project manager, anytime the project manager, who is John Doe, is coming, we need to pay for his travels. So if that's the case, that means in addition to this, we're also going to be apportioning expenses. So to assign the expenses, you simply click on the expenses tab in the detail view. Then at the bottom here, you're going to see an add button. You just simply click on add to create a portion for you to type in your expenses. So it will ask you what is the name of the new expense item. So remember, travels for the PM, for the project manager. Then it will ask us for the expense category. So if I double click within this expense category, it brings up different expense categories for me. So you can see all of those travels categories that I've mentioned, or rather expense categories that I've mentioned. So I select travel from here, and then of course I click on this select button, and then it will ask me for budgeted cost. How much are we paying for this travel? So let's say for this travel on this very day, we're going to be paying, let's say, 500, right? So once I enter that, notice that 500 gets added to the budgeted total cost for that activity, which the total was 7,000. Now it has changed to 7,500. So that's exactly how the expenses and how to allocate expenses. Like I mentioned earlier on, there are a series of other expense categories that you can choose from. But just in case the expense category you're looking for is not captured here, you can simply create further expense categories by going to admin, and then of course selecting admin categories, and then click on expense categories. So you can see expense categories here. Then you can simply click on add and type in your new expense category. So let's say we have accommodation. Then hit enter. So good. So we have added accommodation as part of our expense category. Click on close. So if I now come here and click on it, so you notice accommodation shows up here as part of our expense category. Beyond that, the expense tab can also be used for what I now refer to as a top-down estimate. Well, this is my own way of tweaking things. So it might not necessarily be the reason why the developers of this very wonderful software put that portion in. But then sometimes I like to do a top-down estimate. What I mean by a top-down estimate, don't forget, in estimating cost in your project, there are various ways you can do that. You can do what we call a bottom-up estimate. So bottom-up estimate simply means that we are going to be estimating using the very components of that particular activity to do our estimation. That's what the bottom-up estimate here refers to. So say for example, Obalin here has his birthday. Then Obalin wants to determine how much the birthday party is going to cost. So if Obalin decides to do a bottom-up estimate for this, Obalin will basically add all the various components of that party. For example, how much would the DJ charge? How much would be the venue? Then also how much would the refreshment, the food, the drinks, and all of that? How much would the refreshment cost? And then how much would other aspects of the birthday? I'm not really so much to birthday celebrations to know exactly some of the things that happen there. Okay, but so if I am able to reasonably estimate all of this, so this costs, let's say 10,000, and then this costs, let's say 5,000, and then let's say this costs 20,000. So at the end of the day, I'll be budgeting 25,000 for the birthday. So this is a typical example of what we now refer to as a bottom-up estimate. So in essence, our link should be budgeting about 35,000 for the birthday party. And that's exactly what the bottom-up estimate is. So you can see we're able to come up with the cost by adding up all the various components or resources of that very project. So if you notice, that's exactly the type of estimating that Primavera adopts. If you go back to our earlier example, you notice that the cost of an activity is basically how much the resource person is going to be earning, and then multiply by the number of days, which is exactly how we now come up with the cost for that particular activity. But then the bottom-up estimate is the best form of estimating, but in some cases it might prove very difficult for you to, especially let's say you're not a quantity surveyor. You're basically a scheduler, so you don't even know like how much some of these things go for. You don't have some of those details, or you've done something similar before, and then you have an idea of what the whole activity costs, but not necessarily the other details about resources and all of that. So you can now do what we refer to as a top-down estimate. So top-down estimate simply means that you now say, okay, for activity A, I'm going to be budgeting 10,000. That's basically what the top-down estimate refers to. So you're budgeting using historical information, expert judgment, or estimates that have been given to you by subject matter experts. So if you come back to Obalin's birthday party, before doing a top-down estimate, Obalin can now say, okay, for my birthday party, I'm going to be budgeting 50,000 for it. Therefore, means that this 50,000 is going to be shared amongst these activities and every other activity that may take place in that particular birthday. So that's exactly what the top-down estimating, like I mentioned here, is used for. So for the purpose of this illustration, I'm going to be using the expense tab to do top-down estimating, just in case I really do not know how much this resource person earn per day or per hour, as the case may be, and then I still want to assign cost to my activity. So if that's the case, let me go to the automation system, and then I select design building layout. You can see I've not assigned any resource here. My budgeted cost is simply showing 0, and then I know that the design building layout will cost about, let's say, 7,000 to do that. So I simply come to my expense tab, I click on add, and then I simply go to the budgeted cost and I type in 7,000. So if you are typing that, watch what will happen to my budgeted total cost. So as I click enter, notice that it says my design building layout is going to cost me 7,000. And then let's say my design building is also going to cost me about 5,000. So I also click on add, and then under the Under the budgeted cost, I simply type in 5,000 there and then click on enter. So that's how you can do a bottom-up estimate. But please note that if you're going to be using bottom-up estimate, then for your resources, there might not be any need for you to now begin to assign standard rates. In other words, how much your resources earn per day. Because if you do that, once you assign resource to that particular activity, it will automatically also include it as part of your budgeted total cost. Alright, so in this particular lesson, we'll take a look at how to assign resources and then also how to be able to come up with the budgeted cost, budgeted total cost. Remember, we added the resources column. We also added the budgeted total cost column. We assigned those resources simply by clicking on the resource icon here in the command bar, or simply by coming to the resources tab in the detail view, which is what we've done earlier, and then clicking on add resources, or simply within the resource column in the cell that you want to assign a resource to. When you click in it, it brings up the assign resource window for you. So you select the relevant resource and then you click on the assign button. And once you do that, Primavera will do the rest of the work for you, determining the total budgeted cost. Don't also forget an integral part of all that we have done, which is the budgeted units per time. This helps us to be able to determine how many of these resources you are going to be needing on a daily basis. I hope this particular lesson has been very informative for you. So in the next lesson, we're going to now talk about how to baseline our project. Baselining our project is basically taking a snapshot so that when implementation starts, we can now reasonably tell if we are beginning to have a variance or we are still on the same path based on what we have planned earlier on.